From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have in the menu. Davos divide. The who's who of politics and business gather in Switzerland as uncertainty darkens the outlook for Europe. A big win for big tech. Why a hard-fought copyright law now looks to be in jeopardy. More than a name. The nationalist forces at work in Greece over a government deal with Macedonia to change its name. Brexit Plan B. Theresa May desperately tries to break a parliamentary deadlock over Brexit. And in tonight's Raw Moment, is this satire ripped straight from the dreams of the British Prime Minister? All right, it is time to meet our panelists for this evening. We have James Crisp. He is Brussels correspondent for The Telegraph. James, you know this. What story are you watching tonight?
Brexit.
Brexit.
Dial B for Brexit. Dial B for Plan B.
Plan B or rehash Plan A.
Yeah.
All right, we also have Kathleen Van Brem. She's a Belgian MEP with the Socialists and Democrats. So, Kathleen, what story are you looking at closely?
Well, I had it with Brexit. No. It's a joke. No. But I prefer the Davos issue because it's about the world, it's about inequality. It's one of the top issues, I think, of political life today.
All right, and we also have Shada Islam, Director of Geopolitics at think tank Friends of Europe. Shada, which story are you looking at?
Macedonia and Greece, all about identity, national politics, you know, what does it mean in this new world? Yeah, I'm watching that.
All right, well, we have a lot of stories to cover for you tonight, but we are going to begin in Davos. The world's political and business elites are there, descending on the highest point in Switzerland, and they're going to take part in the World Economic Forum against a backdrop of picturesque slopes. The foundation hopes to improve the world through a series of high-level conferences and meetings. But this isn't just any other year in Davos. It's the year the UK officially leaves the European Union, a year already rife with tensions over inequality, and the year of European elections amid a wave of populism. In fact, several populist leaders are making their way to the Swiss Alps and to Davos. All right, we will be bringing you all the latest developments out of Davos. And right now, let us cross over to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, can you take us through what to expect this week? You know, there are some heads of states there with clashing opinions who are going to be there.
Yeah, hello, Tessa. I hope you're warm in that nice studio back in Brussels. It is rather cold, as you would suspect, at the highest city in Europe in the middle of January. But over the coming days, as you say, thousands of the world's most influential, important and richest people will gather here at the World Economic Forum to discuss how the world should react to events and be shaped over the next year. And as you say, there are some very notable names on that list. Let me take you through who we're expecting to see when things finally kick off tomorrow. We are, first of all, going to see Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor. She is going to be here, as is Giuseppe Conte, the Italian Prime Minister. We're also expecting to see Leo Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, who we'll also be talking to here on Euronews later on in the week. Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president, is here, along with Sebastian Kurz, the Austrian Chancellor, and the recently elected Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Now, in many ways, actually, she is one of the more interesting individuals here. Last year, the darling of Davos was in some ways Tessa Emmanuel Macron. He received a standing ovation. His star has somewhat fallen, whereas Jacinda Ardern's message seems to be going down quite well. She's going to come here and talk about how isolationism and protectionism is not the way forward, particularly for Europe. She wants to see a more liberal, open and trading world. That is clearly in contrast to many of those populist leaders. But what is more notable in some ways, Tessa, about this year is simply the people who aren't attending. No Donald Trump this year. He's dealing with the government shutdown. No Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, of course, having to cope with all that Brexit chaos. And also no Emmanuel Macron, dealing with his own domestic troubles. And even in the last 24 hours, the Zimbabwean president has also pulled out, again, dealing with lots of strife back home. So this Davos, in many ways, may be defined by not who is here, but also who fails to turn up.
Indeed, Darren, but there's still a lot of leaders who managed to make it. And you were mentioning isolationism earlier. What's interesting, I think we saw the poll that came out on Sunday. It was a World Economic Forum poll talking about some interesting results. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, indeed, this was a survey, I think, of 10,000 people globally. It was done by the World Economic Forum. We get a sense where public opinion is when it comes to the views of isolationism, protectionism, and particularly the movement of people around the world. Let's have a look at what that survey did find. This is with when people were asked in different parts of the world working with other countries whether they thought it was extremely or very important. Globally, 76% of people thought it was extremely or very important. Figure highest in Southeast Asia, it must be said. North America, the figure's still pretty high at 70%. But in Western Europe, we came last down at 61%. Again, a sign, I think, of a continent that is very much divided along these lines of protectionism, isolationism, and it should be said on our attitude to globalised migration. Clearly, Europe is a continent that has had a record number of migrants over the last 5 years or so. Many across Europe clearly not in favour of that. But that figure of 61%, almost two-thirds, saying it is still extremely important that countries work with one another. Another survey, as we'd expect out today, coming from Oxfam, talking about the wealth distribution in the world. Clearly, some of the wealthiest people will be here, from some of the executives of Facebook through to George Soros. A reminder from Oxfam that it's some of the wealthiest people, the wealthiest, I think, 26, have got more money than the poorest 50% of people in the world. This remains, of course, a very divided world. They will be looking at globalisation, at inequality, at the lack of women, as one would expect. But ultimately, what will be talked about most is the global economy, because when you look at the figures, what will concern the business leaders and the politicians here most is that China's economy is stalling and the global economy is slowing down quite significantly. And that will be the big challenge for leaders here in 2019.
All right, thank you for that, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. Right, as Darren was saying there, the words cooperation, openness, positive attitude to immigration. First of all, when we read this poll of 10,000 people by the World Economic Forum, do we see this as a good gauge of what the world is really thinking? Shada, what do you think?
I think so, and it's important that we look at the world and not just at Europe, because the figures show that Europe is sometimes a little out of step with the general mood across the world. And that, I think, has to do with our own prosperity at the moment, the privileges that Europeans have at the moment, and the fear that some of the migration and some of the changes that are happening on the geopolitical landscape, the rise of China, the rise of India, the rise of Brazil, that they're going to take away from Europe. So the cake seen from Europe isn't seen as big enough. And I think that is the problem.
But I think, having said that, we were seeing also populism and nationalism in the biggest democracies, such as India, the US, Brazil, Indonesia, and the European Union. Do you think the European Union is out of step, as Shada was saying, with where the world is going?
Well, I agree on the analysis that we are a very wealthy region with our own problems, also on inequality, on climate, and maybe not yet ready to really embrace the new economy. I think that are the most important challenges. And it is absolutely possible in Europe and in the rest of the world to combat these inequalities and climate change at the same time. But we need, again, politicians that believe in these solutions and at the same time put equality and a just agenda at top of the political agenda. I think one of the most cynical things that happened the last decade is that since the financial crisis, remember, all these people in the financial world, greediness that made almost the whole financial system turn around, the impact of that is major, especially in Europe, is major on these people that have the most difficulties. That means they are paying the price, and at the same time, since the financial crisis, the amount of billionaires doubled. They doubled. So we need to really change that cynicism into something that is believe in the future, how to tackle inequalities and climate change.
Okay.
I mean, one thing which there's a real sort of irony to going to a luxury ski resort with a bunch of billionaires to discuss how to end inequality. I mean, you know, it's an extreme point of view, but if perhaps there was a gigantic avalanche on Davos, I think the only two people who'd be missed would be Darren and David Attenborough.
All right, well, let's leave it at that for now, because I want to bring in what the founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, was saying in relation to what the points that were brought up by Shada and Kathleen. He was talking about the future of Europe. Let's take a look at what he had to say about that.
I'm very concerned about the future of Europe. And certainly we will discuss his future very much with the presence of, I think, a great majority of European leaders here, particularly Mrs. Merkel. I hope that also we will use the platform to develop some new ideas. What we need are visions for the future of Europe.
All right, James, following up on your point, okay, the rich patting themselves on the back, drinking champagne, but is it, it is a platform for people with the money and the power to do something, isn't it?
Why do you have to go to a luxury ski resort to do something if you've got the money and the power? It's a backslapping exercise with added canapes and complimentary Pilates lessons. Look, I'm not someone who, makes a habit of praising Jean-Claude Juncker. But one thing I will say for Juncker is I believe that he has either never been to Davos or has just gone once.
Year, but yeah.
Yes, he was about to, but his better angels intervened.
All right, but for the sake of balance, in past Davos World Economic Forums, you had North and South Korea. They held their first ministerial meeting in Davos in 1989, and then the Greek and Macedonian prime ministers met face to face for the first time in 7 years, and that paved the way to what we are seeing now in Greece and Macedonia, which we will talk about later. So, Kathleen.
No, but I agree. Yes.
Okay.
Some good things might happen, and it's always good to network. But again, in a fancy ski village, you can do that also in the European Parliament or just in the cafe around the corner. Good things can happen when you network. But the essence is, like Angela Merkel, whom I respect a lot, so it's not criticism to her personally, but Angela Merkel, she should stay in Europe. In the sense of she should do her job in the Council. And what do we need to do for Europe? Talking about inequalities, make sure that we have a just taxation system in Europe. If you later on will discuss the Googles and they are not paying their fair share of tax. Do you know that for every euro that we have in taxes in Europe, only 4 cents is taxation on wealth. So making a fair balance on taxation happen in Europe is maybe the most important thing that Angela Merkel can do. And in that sense, she needs to do her job in the Council and not go to the...
People talk about the rise of protectionism across the world. Well, isn't it time the EU had a bit more protectionism against what's basically a bunch of multinational American companies?
So you think they're going the right way? You think Europe is going the right way?
I don't think. No, I agree with Kathleen. I think that basically, look, if you have Davos, which happens once a year, you have the EU leaders who meet every 2 months for summits which go on for hours and hours, when yet, what's been done? What's actually been achieved beyond another series of can-kicking exercises? The digital tax, which I think is you're referring to, is being kicked down the road again. What you have is actually, if you believe that the European Union should be treated as a country, you have foreign multinational companies coming over and taking advantage. To borrow a word from Donald Trump, we need to build a wall to keep the Americans out.
But what you've said is right, but I think it's important that these fora take place because you get people like Abe, Jacinda Ardern, you get Bolsonaro, you get people from all over the world to discuss issues of common interest, right? And I do agree with you, elite sitting up there in the mountains, that is not a good image. And Davos is losing its credibility, it's losing its shine, so it has to become more inclusive. But discussions are important, I think, because they talk about issues of common interest, climate change, tax avoidance, all of these issues, inequality. Right? And I think we need to see who is there. We're looking at, the Trump's not there and the Brexiteers are not there, etc. But you've got people from Japan, New Zealand, India, China. They use that as a platform to talk about their concerns. And we in Europe, really, guys, we need to hear what the rest of the world is saying as well. And that's where we can do it.
Macron's not there because he's running scared.
Absolutely. But, these things are obvious now. These are obvious. They're out there. Name and shame. Let's do it.
It's true. A lot of issues are brought up. Important issues are brought up. And it is the question whether solutions do come up. But, OK, another issue that we've been talking about here is it's inequality. And I think we need to give a little bit more focus on this because it is, a problem across the world. And new figures have just been revealed as just to how wide that gap is between the world's richest and the world's poorest. Alex Morgan and our team in theCUBE have this part of the story. Alex?
Well, Tessa, interesting listening to you there, talking on the panel, saying, you know, the rich up in the mountains, not a great image for Davos. And certainly this report from Oxfam released today to coincide with all this gathering wants people to really take stock and reflect. Now, it's worth saying the methodology here, it's controversial, but either way, it's got people talking. Oxfam claiming that the number of billionaires have doubled in the last decade. The wealth of the top 26 equates to that of the bottom 50% of the poorest people in the world. You're talking 26 people at the top who are billionaires and 3.8 billion at the bottom, according to these Oxfam figures. But either way, moving away from the Oxfam figures, let's bring up Bloomberg here, for example. They are also pointing out that of the billionaires attending Davos over the last decade, their wealth has soared. That is the key part of this narrative. And at the same time, as the rich are not just getting richer, we're talking really, really rich. The poor, inequality on the rise. Now, Oxfam's solution, they want a 1% wealth tax to be imposed. And that's, controversial, of course, but one of the things they're saying is too many of the wealthiest people are not paying tax. They're dodging tax. Either way, this report from Oxfam, these figures released by Bloomberg, it's got people talking about Davos, about the image you were talking about. Let's bring up some of the comments here, like Anand, who's an author. He closely follows these things. He's written a book, contributes to NBC as well, saying here, if the World Economic Forum wants to save itself and its members from the ire that's rising, it should use this week to come up with a plan to tackle inequality. He also goes on to say, and make no mistake, look at this, many of those gathering in Davos are the cornerstones of the class and the system that made it this way. Arsonists are at a firefighting meeting. That is damning, isn't it? Damning when the very image of Davos is being compared to a group of arsonists getting together, trying to figure out how to put out the fire. Julie here, she's a psychologist. Look at this. We need an alternative to Davos, she says, for primary, middle and lower class people, lower earners, who can discuss the issues that matter to them. Not a meeting of the super rich and powerful, but a rival to Davos. And then you've got people like Richard Murphy. He's an academic, and he says, well, it's a party for the richest, and they're partying at our expense. So either way, these figures from Oxfam, take them with a pinch of salt, if you will, but it's got this conversation going again. People looking at Davos, a lot of people on social media saying, these are the wealthiest looking out for themselves.
All right, thank you for that, Alex Morgan and our team in the Cube. All right, we're talking about the problems surrounding Davos and how effective it is. You're saying there is a point to that, but is there another solution, perhaps? An anti-Davos, perhaps?
Well, I think some of the ideas that were brought up just now are interesting. A tax on the richest. I think the idea of having an alternative Davos is good as well. But Tessa, this is a global problem. Now, when you talk about taxes, talk about what's happening in India or Pakistan or Brazil or South Africa. The rich don't pay tax there either. And I think this is a global issue, and that's why we have Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development Goals, people coming together to work on global challenges that they share. And I think these are important issues, but absolutely right. Let's get some real measures going. And some of these rich people, some of them, are also engaging in philanthropy. Philanthropy is also good. I mean, if you take, the Gates Foundation, doing a lot on issues to do with illness and sickness. And so it's not all dark, but I do think there has to be a change. And
what about in terms of government? Because here in Europe, again, you talk about Macron earlier, yellow vest protests. A lot of that is on inequality that they're bringing up. And then it feeds into populism and nationalism, as we were talking about earlier. So in that sense, governments, are they really falling short?
Absolutely. And in that sense, I have nothing against philanthropy, but these same people, I'm not saying Gates, but these same people at the same time do not pay taxes. Yes. And they say, we will decide what we will do with the money. I don't like that. Everybody needs to pay their fair share. And at the same time, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them still are earning loads of money on fossil fuels that is destroying our world. So the things come together. That's why I always say, and climate change and inequalities, tackling them together. And in that sense, it's the governments that need to take up the responsibility. And that's why I'm so pro-European. There's a lot of problems in Europe, and we do not do what we have to do, but only at the European level we can start making these radical changes. Because if we have to wait, I'm absolutely in favor of a global tax, absolutely. But don't
So
it's not going to happen.
So taxing the rich is a radical idea?
No. A radical idea, yes, it is, but a radical idea is at least start taxing at European level. That would make the first change. And then we can go to the global issues. Because globally, if we have to wait until we have a global government...
Now, look, I agree with a lot of what Kathleen says, but the idea of taxing at a European Union level is something I can't agree with.
You're a Brit.
I'm an Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, you're a Brit, yeah.
You know, I don't like paying high taxes, and but you know,
the only way to make these big companies pay.
I mean, but there's a difference. There's a difference between sort of me. I'd say I am a middle-class person, but I see the people in Davos, and it makes me furious. It actually makes me. Who are these people up a hill laughing at me and working out what's going to happen to me?
Right.
But you know, that is the. Do you know how much they pay? And if you're invited, a businessman pays 27,000 Swiss francs, which is
peanuts for them.
It's a lot of
peanuts for them, but it's like most people.
All right, but it's also media
I'll give you the last word,
James, it's also media hype. I mean, the Davos men, you know, man, etc., is created by the media as well. So the journalists are out there, right, covering every word. You're not. Covering every word they say. So the media is partly responsible for all this, you know, this kind of
representative from the media. I will just say to you all, don't pay any attention to Davos. It's rubbish.
Having said that, James, we will talk about Davos.
Oh, you will, because you've sent Darren.
Yeah, we will, and we will see a lot more of Darren. All right, but first, coming up on Raw Politics, a lot more to talk about. Time's up for Theresa May's Plan B Brexit deal. We will bring you up to speed on that, plus uproar in Greece over a government deal with Macedonia to change its name. We'll dive into what's driving the protests. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, the Greek parliament started 5 days of debate today about a historic deal to name its northern neighbor North Macedonia. The Greek Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, faces deep domestic opposition to this deal. Police clashed with protesters yesterday in Athens at a large rally to oppose the plan. Some fear the new name implies a claim on the Greek province of Macedonia if that deal goes ahead. And Greece will drop its decade-long veto to the Republic of Macedonia's application to NATO. And joining me now to discuss this is Efi Koutsokosta, a journalist with Euronews' Greek language service. We also have Tanya Milevska, a Brussels correspondent with its Macedonian Information Agency. And joining us again is Shada Islam, Director for Europe and Geopolitics with Friends of Europe. Okay, we saw the protests in Greece. I think 60,000 people were out in the streets, right? Efi, can you tell us why is it such a big deal and it's just so emotional in Greece?
It's very emotional, especially in the north part of Greece, called Macedonia. It's a region, it's a historic, it's a lot of history behind that. It goes back to the 19th century with wars and many nationalisms. And of course, there are 3 decades, almost 3 decades with this dispute going on. No government has managed to solve it, to either the Greece or the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia so far. Mm-hmm. So now it's a momentum that the Greek government sees that it's possible to do it and finally solve this issue forever. But of course, there is a part of the Greek society that has really strong emotions.
Is it an identity thing for
It is an identity thing. Yeah? It is an identity thing. Also, it's the opposition parties that really support this part of the society, some nationalism raising. And of course, there are some claims that they think that they are going to lose their territory, they lose their pride, they lose their identity and name, and of course, their own history.
So when you say some, you mean the northern Greeks? Is this what you're referring to?
It's the northern part of Greece, yes.
And what about in Macedonia? Why is this such a big deal?
Well, it's obviously just as emotional as it is, and it's also an identity issue, but what's more important in Macedonia is that the people feel that it's being imposed from the outside, you know, so suddenly we have to change our constitution, you know, someone from the outside comes and says, oh, you have to change your constitution and your name, you know, it doesn't feel like something natural. But I wanted to come back just what you said about irredentism and territorial claims and so on. This agreement, the Prespa agreement, actually solves that because it says on paper that there will be no claims, that, you know, that we respect the territorial integrity of both sides. So when the opposition in Greece says, that they fear territorial claims with Prespa agreement. It actually, the Prespa agreement actually confirms the territorial integrity.
Is it more from a symbolic point of view, I suppose? Okay.
I would like to respond to that, because what they are saying, actually, it's not only about the territorial claims. This can come in many years, maybe, what people think, not supporting that, but they say it's not the name itself, like Northern Macedonia or Macedonia. It's that, okay, if you have Northern Macedonia as the name, so why don't you have, like, the Northern Macedonia language or the Northern Macedonia ethnicity or nationality?
What I can see... Okay, just as an outside point of view, I can see how really strongly linked it is to the culture, to the language, to the identity. I'll give you a quick response to this, because I'll get to Shada.
Okay, so it's not Northern Macedonia, and it's important to remind people that it's North Macedonia. It's not Northern.
Yeah.
If it were Northern Macedonia, I think you would have the feeling there's a southern part.
Right.
So, and what Effie said, it's North Macedonia, the name, but the adjective remains Macedonian and not North Macedonia.
I think there's a lot of detail that is really clearly very, very emotional.
But you see how emotional
exactly,
it is.
It is emotional.
It is.
But from a more geopolitical point of view, because when we look at Alexis Tsipras trying to get it through Parliament, what's in it for Greece? Like, why is he trying to get it through?
Well, I hope he gets it through, because it's important for Greece, obviously, to solve its bilateral issues, if you like, with North Macedonia. But it's also important for us in Europe. You know, this has been in limbo. This question has been in limbo and hanging over the Western Balkans for, 3 decades now almost, right? And we need to get it sorted, because the Western Balkans membership of the EU, say in 2025, as Jean-Claude Juncker has said, really depends on reconciliation within the region and with its neighbors. And if that's not done, a very crucial part of Europe will not really be fully integrated and connected to the EU. And I think it's very important that these emotional issues, and there are many in the Western Balkans, this is one of them, need to be sorted. And we have time now, let's do it. The world is changing, and I think the region needs reconciliation, but also connectivity. So if it's not done, you know, you'll fall back. The Western Balkans will fall back. And that, I think, is not good for anyone, really.
Is that a consideration in the Balkans? Stability, you know, contributing to stability and so maybe economic progress, etc. Is this a consideration when we're talking about the name? Okay, let's start with Greece.
Let's say in Greece, yes, of course, they take into consideration this aspect. But of course, for the people, I will agree with my colleague that it's a matter that comes from outside. That's what they believe. The people who react in this way is that really it comes from NATO, from the EU, and they're pushing to solve something that for them it's already solved. So it's a matter of a balance here.
Okay, it feels like it's being imposed from the outside, which is the point that you were making. All right, quick last word from you.
Yeah, no, but I just wanted to say that it's important to solve this issue, because it will have some sort of impact on the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. You know, after the first amendments were passed in the Macedonian parliament, the dialogue was re-energized before, you know, falling back. But we hope that now this dialogue will be re-energized for a second time. So it does have
it's a first step towards basically more dialogue in the region, where, as you say, it's really complicated.
It keeps Russia
out of that sphere. It's a puzzle, as you rightly say. All right, a good analogy there. All right, now do stay with us. We have a lot more coming up. We'll bring you up to speed on today's Brexit developments, a lot of that, of course. And after the break as well, your right to share memes. Did big tech win the battle over copyright in the European Union? That's coming up. Welcome back to our politics. Now, controversial, a proposed EU copyright bill might be getting the boot. It was one that had both sides on the issue squabbling over how robust or diluted the amendments were. But in the end, it might be the tech industry, actually, that walks away in this battle with a big win. And so what's so divisive about this the EU amendments? It comes down, in fact, to 2 articles. So let's start with Article 11, or the so-called link tax. It would force news aggregators to pay publishers to use article snippets. And there's a question about what those snippets actually mean. And we have Article 13, which is known as the Amine Ban. It would hold tech platforms liable for infringements on a copyrighted work. Now, the European Commission spokesperson talked about the developments this morning, and here's what he had to say.
The copyright proposal is a priority file for the EU institutions and a key reform for the European citizens as well as the creative and the press sectors in our economy. Our aim for this reform is to bring tangible benefits for creators, artists, journalists, press publishers, researchers, educators, cultural heritage institutions, and EU citizens, and to open up the potential for more creativity and content.
That was Margaritis Skinas, the spokesperson of the European Commission there. And joining me here in the studio to dive a little deeper into all the things copyright and tech is a tech expert journalist at BrusselsGeek.com, Jennifer Baker. And we also have a rapporteur on this file for the Consumer Protection Committee, British MEP Catherine Styler. And joining us is a Director General for the International Confederation of Music Publishers, Johnny Phelan. All right, I'll start with you, Jennifer. Can you just explain this copyright issue? Okay, why is it so contentious?
Okay, well, that's a big question.
Break it down.
As you
in TV speak.
As you said in your opening, it does come down to these two particular articles, Article 11 and Article 13. The first one is called the link tax, or so-called Google tax, or as it is in some countries, the not Google tax, because it has been tried in various forms in Spain and in Germany in particular, and it didn't really work because in those countries, Google is the biggest aggregator of driving people towards these publishers' news websites. And in Spain, Google just said, well, look, if we have to pay you, we're out. We're leaving the country. And in Germany, what happened was that all these publishers realized their traffic was dropping because they were not being listed by Google. And so they just said, oh, we'll waive the requirement to have you pay. So those are the two big sort of examples we have to work with. I am not one to defend big tech. I very often tell you how much I hate the idea of big tech being the gatekeepers of our online lives. But even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And in this instance, I actually do agree with Google. Because if you're a big publisher, you're probably going to do OK whether or not there is this Article 11 or not. If you're a small niche publisher, you're very much reliant on the Googles driving you towards, driving users and readers towards you.
Yeah, and quickly on the Article 13.
Article 13 is about upload filters. Yeah. It's about using automated processing to identify when copyrighted material has been used.
So that's automated. So then there's an issue there as well on whether, you know, because that's why I call Amine Ban, because what about parodies? What about, you know, these things should they be considered?
The issue there is also with Google as YouTube again. Sure. They've got the digital technology available to do it, and they do it best, and they're already using that. So it kind of wouldn't really make a big difference to them again.
So, OK, Catherine, in which side of the argument do you fall? From a consumer protection point of view?
Well, from a consumer protection point of view, not happy with Article 13, certainly not happy with 11 either. And as it stands just now, we now know that the trilogue this evening has been cancelled, that we are very stuck on 13 still. And I think, and it boils down to about liability, who is liable for what. And at the moment, copyright's all about balance, and we still to get the balance right between making sure rights holders are compensated, but also that consumers are protected.
But why do countries have such a big issue?
Well, because different countries have different copyright rules.
Sure. Okay.
And so at the moment, if you're going to use technological means to determine whether something's a parody or not, it's not really, you can't determine whether a parody exemption in the UK is the same for something in Germany. And this is the problem that you have. And that's why the freedom of speech argument is so important in this space, that we can't guarantee that people putting up legal content would be able to have that legal content staying up because something would determine, a piece of an algorithm would determine whether something is allowed or not. So there's a real freedom of speech issue, and the meme issue is certainly not resolved. I mean, my kids, this is the one thing, my children, I said, what do you mean, Mum, you're going to ban memes? And somebody said, I'm the queen of memes. I'm like, well, actually, we don't want to ban memes. I don't want to see memes banned. And at the moment, the way the wording is, it certainly could lead to that. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the space. We all want to make sure there's balance, that rights holders are compensated, and that freedom of speech is protected. But at the moment, the way things are, the balance is not there.
So what about for content creators, Johnny? What is the problem here? Do you guys want that you think it's diluted? Do you think there should be more done?
Well, I think you've just raised the key question, what is the problem? Because this particular article and this particular dossier has been subjected to so much speculation and dogma about what it's seeking to actually achieve. There is a very
13.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So in Article 13, there is a very clear and categoric value gap, and that value gap stems from the fact that in the last 15 years, there's emerging different types of platforms, such as YouTube, where users can upload content that it's not clear that they should obey existing copyright law. So what Article 13 does, and I really always say, encourage people to read the law and what it's seeking to achieve. The law actually simply clarifies which types of services should obey existing copyright law. I would fully agree with Mr. Sheena's comments this morning. He's been saying the same thing for several years. This is about clarifying who should obey existing copyright law, not revising, not breaking the internet and these kinds of dogmas and adjective-based lobbying that we've been seeing. It's about getting fair pay for creators. And in Article 13, that is the clarification of liability.
I'm sorry, I mean, I have to disagree with you. I think there's been heavy lobbying on all sides, and the fact is, of the matter at the moment, we don't know which text we're actually talking about in Article 13, to be honest with you. I found myself actually in a Shadows meeting last week, where we were discussing a text which was on Politico, not actually a text which was which was put forward by the Romanian presidency, and thus we have this evening the Romanian presidency pulling the next meeting of the trialogue because we don't have a text to look at because the council, the member states, are divided on it.
Is this whole copyright thing? Is it
now?
But let's be clear about what happened on Friday. You know, a delay in a procedure is not exactly a newsflash in European law. That's all that was what happened. The member states did not vote against Article 13. That is clear. What they did say is that we're not yet in a position to agree a general approach as a council to go to the final trialogue in what's been a long process. The Commission, the Parliament, and 438 MEPs in September very clearly said
and if it goes to the next Parliament, though, there's a problem, isn't it?
So all of those...
go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, it's worth noting that, you know, we've got 11 countries now in the Council saying they're not happy with Article 13. And we're even seeing letters from rights holders saying they're not happy with Article 13.
Of which
no one's happy.
Yeah, no, I mean... So,
no one's happy with Article 13.
And it's a blunt... Copyright's a blunt enough tool as it is, and you can use it to smash an egg.
Right.
But it's automated, added into the mix, makes it even blunter. And if you've even got, on YouTube, for example, 1% of false positives, that's like hundreds of thousands of legit...
So let's be clear about Article 13. It doesn't oblige new technologies, nor restrict the internet, nor create new exceptions. It clarifies the liability. Therefore, the technology which is currently in place should be obliged for all.
Well, it's down to what the text is. And I think at the end of the day, we have a very limited time now, and I think the clock is ticking.
In fact, we don't have much time now. Can I get a one-word answer from you? Did big tech win this one?
No one's won anything.
Okay. Not yet, at least. All right. All right. We'll leave it at that for now. This tech discussion coming up on Raw Politics. The latest on Brexit. Plus, Theresa May goes back to Parliament to find a way to break that deadlock. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Our Politics. Now, British Prime Minister Theresa May, she is going to present her Plan B to break the Brexit deadlock. Let's go to our correspondent, Vincent McAvennie in London. Vincent.
Hi, Tessa. Well, Theresa May has just been on her feet in the House of Commons, saying that following last week's vote, it's clear the government's approach had to change, and it has. But she then went on to list how she will be changing. But to quote the Prime Minister herself, nothing seems to have changed. She talked about the not being right to rule out no deal. The way to rule out no deal is to simply approve her deal. She says there can't be any revoking of Article 50 or any deferring of that. She says a second referendum would risk damaging social cohesion. She says the duty of the government is to implement the first referendum, and that those wanting a second referendum are actually trying to break up the integrity of the United Kingdom and could lead to bad faith in democracy. Now, on the Northern Ireland backstop, the Prime Minister has promised to explore more ways to provide exit mechanisms, but didn't give any specifics. And then she went on to make a surprise announcement. She says that the £65 fee that EU citizens have been paying to get accreditation to stay here in the UK, well, that has now been cancelled, and anyone who has paid will get that money sent back to them.
Right, thank you for that. Our correspondent there, Vincent McAvennie in London. All right, let us hear from what Theresa May had to say earlier.
With regard to the backstop, despite the changes we have previously agreed, there remain two core issues: the fear that we could be trapped in it permanently, and concerns over its potential impact on our union if Northern Ireland is treated differently from the rest of the UK. So I will be talking further this week to colleagues, including in the DUP, to consider how we might meet our obligations to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland in a way that can command the greatest possible support in the House. And I will then take the conclusions of those discussions back to the EU.
And joining me to talk about Theresa May's Plan B is James Chris. He's back. He's a Daily Telegraph correspondent. We also have our own correspondent, Shona Murray, here with us. And we have a German MEP from the ECR group, Bernd Lucke, also in this panel. All right, let's start with what Theresa May was saying, the backstop. Obviously, that's the biggest deal. Bernd, I'll start with you. Do you think there is any possible movement on this, or are we just regurgitating and there's nothing that's going to break this deadlock?
Well, I was looking forward to hearing what Theresa May had to say in the lower house. And it seems to me that not much has actually been achieved. I mean, she tells people that she will talk to the DUP, which I thought she might have done earlier on, or probably she has already done so, but this is not a plan, right? It's definitely not a plan. And I'm somewhat surprised, actually, that the whole Brexit issue was always about giving the people control back about their future, and then the referendum question is always ruled out. I would actually think there is a rather straightforward way to proceed, since the deal has been rejected by the lower house. It would be quite straightforward for Theresa May to now ask the people, do they approve of that deal? And saying in advance that if they don't approve, then they would have a choice between either a hard Brexit or staying in the EU. So kind of a two-step agreement, two-step referendum would actually clear up matters rather quickly.
I'll just get a quick comment about Ireland, because Shona, you have been talking to the Irish government. You do talk to a lot of them. And what is the feeling? Because Dublin has reacted to suggestions that there's actually any way to move.
Well, actually, we had a Foreign Affairs Council today, so Jeremy Hunt, the British Foreign Secretary, and the Irish Foreign Secretary were in town. And again, really nothing new, reiterating the fact that the backstop is necessary to protect the Good Friday Agreement. The withdrawal agreement itself is sealed, it's sacrosanct, there will be no changes. And again, Michel Barnier and Simon Coveney saying, let's look to the future relationship. Let's hope there could be some sort of dissolving of the red lines from Theresa May, and then they can make some progress. But talking to the DUP, I think that the DUP are the people that Theresa May has only been speaking to, and that's quite a problem. So her returning to them may not give us the progress we hope.
All right, James.
Well, I mean, it's fair to say that the DUP don't have a reputation for being the most sort of flexible political group in Ireland or indeed the world. I mean, I just want to pick up what you said about the second referendum. I mean, you know, Britain is obviously a parliamentary democracy. We've seen a lot of division after the referendum. I do think that if there was to be a second referendum, that isn't going to magically heal the divisions. In fact, my concern would be that it would actually make things even worse. There wouldn't be a sudden sort of return to the status quo. There would be a lot of anger articulated about that. I mean, one thing, the Plan B. Is it a Plan B? No.
And people are getting fed up. We were talking about that earlier. Yeah.
It's the same, really, as where we were before. Although, look, I think waiving the £65 registration fee for EU citizens is a good idea. I think asking them to pay it was embarrassing and petty.
Right.
I think, but why ask them to pay it in the first place if you're just going to change your mind?
Okay, very quickly, Shona.
It's interesting, actually, because the Polish foreign minister said today that he had suggested to Jeremy Hunt and Simon Coveney that perhaps the backstop could be limited to 5 years. And that was seen as something of a crack between the unity of the European Union. Now, both sides dismissed it. But you never know, because obviously Polish citizens make up the largest number of Eastern European citizens.
Let's be honest, though, this idea of EU unity, it is a facade of EU unity. Every summit we go to, we see the true face of EU unity, which is power plays, arguments.
On this issue, though, it's been consistent, I think you can say.
Well, until the Polish foreign minister.
Yeah, but then he was dismissed. But yeah, you're right. You never know.
I'll just have to cut you there, because, I mean, Brexit really is a talker. It always gets people talking, even if we've been talking about it for the last 2 years. And here on Raw Politics, we talk a lot with politicians and journalists, and we would like you to talk to us about what's on your minds. You stick around at 7 p.m. CET tonight. It's your chance to call in and tell us what you think about all the stories that we are covering today. And you can phone in at 800-333-333. 37002. You can see it on your screen. You can also email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. Again, you can also use the hashtag #RawPolitics on Twitter and Facebook, or call us on Skype and connect under use the username #RawPolitics, all of that in one word. All right, Shona, just quickly, what are we talking about?
Would you believe Brexit?
Yes.
People love talking about Brexit so much, we had to have a whole new show. Oh, it's actually not supposed to be dedicated to Brexit. It's supposed to be other EU issues. And tonight it will be Brexit, but also Davos.
Inequality.
What is it good for? Inequality,
Yeah.
taxation, justice, the Oxfam report. So do get in touch and tell us what you think.
I mean, as a politician, I think there's a lot of questions, especially on inequality and what governments and politicians are doing, the Davos happening. I mean, there's a lot of questions that can be asked.
Oh, many questions can be asked, even though I'm somewhat surprised about the combination between Brexit on the one hand and then the Oxfam report on the other hand.
And the Oxfam, there's the Oxfam report as well.
Funny type of combination, given the fact that actually, I mean, the most important topic concerning EU currently is clearly the Brexit question. And coming back to your comment, I would say, I mean, while Britain is a parliamentary democracy, very clearly it seems to be the case that Parliament is unable to find a solution.
It's time they started earning their money.
Since it was the task of the people to find a solution, now Theresa May might just ask the people whether the solution she thinks is good is accepted by the people. So why shouldn't the people vote on that, since Parliament has not actually asked the question?
It's time for the MPs, similar to in the European Parliament, start earning their money and start doing what they're supposed to do and find a solution.
Yeah, I don't object to that, but currently it doesn't seem to be the case that they find the solution.
Instead of extending Article 50, what is your solution to pass this deal? To, you know, there is a terrible impasse when it comes to the backstop, and there's a real lack of knowledge in the House of Commons in relation to the Good Friday Agreement and the obligations that the British government has to that. So, you have this commentary and this language about the backstop trapping the UK.
So what is the solution?
What is your solution if you don't deliver to the people?
I said let's have a general election instead of a referendum.
Do we have
a general election
so that
then people have a chance to get rid of this shower of useless
so
bottom
forget,
feeders
you
who
can
are passing
call in at
politicians.
7 p.m. and join in onto this kind of conversation. Yeah, James will be there.
And you can call them a shower as well.
But even if you think that it's Parliament's job to do the final decision now, I think the question that I raised is still the same. Since Parliament rejected Theresa May's deal, I think the next question to Parliament should be, do they want to have a hard Brexit, or do they want to remain in the EU? Because these are basically the choices, given that the EU doesn't want to negotiate again.
But it actually goes beyond that. The question is, what do we want to happen to British politics? You know, are these parties still fit for purpose, or does something new have to happen?
Well, that's a very fundamental question, of course.
Okay,
but the other questions need to be solved
guys,
first.
I have to call time out.
You don't really like people voting, do you?
But before we go, we have one more for you. We have a raw moment for you, because if you haven't heard, today is known as Blue Monday, supposedly the saddest day of the year. The holidays are over, Christmas bills are due, it's cold, and we're right smack in the middle of winter. All this makes it that much harder to pull yourself out of bed to head to work. Don't we know that? Especially if you're one certain British Prime Minister. Let's take a look.
Can you get your cabinet on side, Prime Minister? Any resignations today?
Probably how do you think that's how she feels?
I do think that's how she feels, and I think that actually shows a very fundamental facet of the British character, where you put the stiff upper lip on in front of everyone, and then as soon as the doors close, you start flipping the V's.
Well, there you go. All right, don't forget, we would like to hear your views. So thank you for joining us tonight. And remember, get in touch with us. You can find me on Twitter at Tessa Ercilia, or follow us also at Euronews and use the hashtag #RawPolitics. And you had all your information on calling your call tonight. Have a good night and see you again tomorrow.